So, there's been a lot of discussion lately as to whether or not it would be a good idea for Jordan Burroughs to make the transition into MMA. And when I first heard this mentioned, I was all ears, and like a lot of wrestling fans, I said, "Hey, this would be a great opportunity for one of our studs to go over to the MMA world and just prove once again that wrestlers are the dominant species on earth. We are the apex predators, if you will." I mean, it's been done time and time again. We've seen so many wrestlers make that transition, just to solidify in everyone's minds that wrestlers are the dominant athletes on the planet. But the more I started to think about it and the more I started to do a little bit of research, I realized that this may not be such a good idea. And, stick with me here and let me just kind of walk through the reasoning as to why I think Jordan Burroughs is better off just kind of sticking to wrestling. So I think it all begins with the prevailing mindset, and it's sort of outdated, but what a lot of people still kind of hold on to is that if you want to make real money, big money, you can't do it in wrestling. You gotta make the transition to MMA. That's where the millions are. And, in a sense, it's true, but not necessarily. And, when you look back through UFC history, you see some guys who, had tremendous success making that transition. You see, I'm going to throw some names out there that maybe some of you older guys will remember, but, I think, two guys that come to mind when I first think of that is Mark Coleman and Mark Kerr. And I actually even made a video about some of my favorite wrestlers that made that transition. I'll post it on here, but, I'll focus on Mark Coleman because he was sort of the UFC guy. Kerr, he did more Pride stuff. There's a great documentary out there called The Smashing Machine. It's kind of old now, but oh man, that movie, it just really did a good job of showing, the struggles that Mark Kerr went through in his MMA career. And yeah, just if you're into watching documentaries, man, check that one out if you can find it. But it's called The Smashing Machine. But back to Mark Coleman. So, he bursts into the UFC, and, wrestlers for a long time had been saying, we're the toughest dudes on the block, and, just put some wrestlers in there and we'll smash anybody. And, and Coleman was like the first guy to really prove that. Even when we look back at guys like the, Dave and Mark Schultz, the Schultz brothers, they two of the greatest, toughest guys on the planet, greatest wrestlers, toughest guys, and they're really not making any money. They both win gold medals in the Olympics, and they're, coaching wrestling part-time and trying to train, and that's how they ended up at the Foxcatcher, farm situation, which that's a whole nother video, but it's well documented, but anyways, back to Coleman. So Coleman comes into the UFC as a wrestler. He's an NCAA champion. He had some success on the international stage. I think he was a world runner-up. He made the Olympic team at one point. So I mean, Coleman's a legit wrestler. Well, Coleman transitions into MMA, and he just basically brings his arsenal of wrestling with, and essentially invents what becomes known as ground and pound. So Coleman's just getting in there, taking dudes down and smashing their faces in. And it was highly successful. He would go on to win a UFC heavyweight championship. And, a lot of wrestlers saw that and started to follow his lead. And you start to see wrestlers kind of making the jump from wrestling into MMA. And again, wrestlers that come to mind would be like Dan Henderson, Randy Couture, Frankie Edgar, guys like that who not only made the transition, but rose to the highest levels of the sport. I mean, Couture used it to, springboard his acting career, and that guy's probably worth a lot of millions now, but good for him. So my point is just that, yes, it was done and it can be done. But then you got to ask the question, how long do you have to prepare outside of the sport of wrestling in order to step into the cage and be successful? And, it's just, those of you who have trained in wrestling and also MMA, that there's a different skill set there. Obviously wrestling does translate well. I mean, if you can control people on the ground, you can take them down, you kind of dictate where the fight goes, so on and so forth. But they're not completely compatible, There's obviously the striking game. If you don't know how to strike, you're not going to have a lot of success, because eventually you're going to run into somebody who can, stuff your shots and then start lighting you up on the outside. And that's kind of what some of these wrestlers run into. If you look at somebody like a Frankie Edgar, I mean, this is a guy who came from a wrestling background, who transitions to MMA and became known for his hands. He's really quick, really fast, and his hands were just unbelievable. And again, rose to the highest levels of the sport. So, could Jordan Burroughs do that? Absolutely. Well, maybe. Yes, I think he could. But since he's been, focused solely on wrestling, does he have the time that it takes to, learn the skills of striking, and not just striking, but also jiu-jitsu? And again, yes, wrestling and jiu-jitsu are cousins, but they're not identical. Again, I mean, I've trained jiu-jitsu, I've trained MMA. I'm from a wrestling background, but when you're training jiu-jitsu, you're trying to submit someone for the most part, or choke them out, right? Wrestling, you're taking people down, you're pinning them. It's a different animal in the sense that in jiu-jitsu, you're literally trying to stop people, either through, making them tap out with pain or the possibility of pain, or, rendering them unconscious. And that's a little bit different, especially because you start cranking on joints, shoulders, we're talking arm bars, we're talking neck cranks, if you're sparring, you're getting your face busted up. Personally, I've broken my nose a few times, and you got to go to work, and you're going in there with a, broken nose and black eyes. And, I remember my neck is always getting cranked, and, you can't turn your head, and your shoulders are getting torqued out. It's hard on you. You get hurt a lot. And wrestling's not necessarily like that. And even Jordan Burroughs himself has said that, he's not too keen on getting punched in the face. He said that in a few interviews. And so, but that's the reality of the sport, and, those of you, again, who've wrestled or also been involved in MMA, that the world is very small, right? The wrestling MMA world is very small, and you pretty much know everybody through 1 or 2 degrees of separation. And, so one of my really close friends, he rose through the ranks of the UFC. I mean, he was fighting some of the big names, and, I don't want to be name dropping here, but I'm only mentioning this because, he knew somebody personally who was training with Brock Lesnar. Obviously, we all know who Brock Lesnar is. Great athlete. I mean, tough as nails. I'm a huge fan. But, and again, I'm not trying to disrespect Brock with this, but this guy said he was, in the training camp with Brock, and he said you were not allowed to punch Brock in the face in training camp, in sparring. And, obviously that's not good if that's the sport that you're into. And you sort of, once he told me that, I kind of noticed it in Brock's fights. Yes, Brock rose to the highest levels of the sport, but once he got in there against guys, Cain Velasquez, who was a fellow wrestler, but also had really good striking, guys like Cain or Alistair Overeem, some of those guys who really knew how to strike, Brock got in trouble because they would stay on the outside. If Brock could get his arms around your legs and get you to the ground, start dropping 10-pound hammers on your face, you're done. But if you can stay on the outside with him and start landing some shots to his face, he's going to be in trouble. And that's kind of what you saw happen with him. Now, would that be the case with Jordan Burroughs? I'm not saying that, but I'm saying Jordan said he's not too keen on getting hit in the face, and he's not too keen on getting hurt. And I don't blame him. I'm not hating on him for that. I'm just saying, so if that's sort of your mindset, then you're not going to translate well into MMA, because that's part of the sport. You don't get to just go in there and shoot doubles and then, pin somebody down and start punching them, which, he could definitely do. But someone who did really, make that transition really well was Henry Cejudo. Now, again, Henry Cejudo, Olympic champion. I think he was the youngest, at least U.S. Olympic champion at the time. I think he did it when he was 21. Kyle Snyder would come along a little bit later and surpass that. But, Cejudo was the youngest. And then, he did not go to college. He basically went right into freestyle wrestling, Olympics, won the Olympics, got out, and started to make the transition into MMA. And even Cejudo did take he had obviously tremendous talent, but it did take him a little while to make that full transition to where he could really get his striking down, and he really did. And he has good hands, and he seems like he has heavy hands when he hits guys. I mean, they fall. And Cejudo seems to really be maybe the best at making that transition. I think I've even heard people say he's the greatest fighter of all time just because he's an Olympic gold medalist and a UFC champ. Not only a UFC champion, but he's won 2 belts. So Cejudo definitely made that transition, but it did take time. And that kind of brings us back to Jordan Burroughs, which is he's 32, I believe, and it's like that's not super old, but if it's when you're starting to make the transition, it might be too late. Now, again, if you go through the UFC roster, just looking at champions, Stipe Miocic, I think he's 38. You go through the list of champions, Kamaru Usman, I think he's 33. These guys are in their 30s. They're not kids, but at the same time, they've been building these skills for a long time to get to where they're at. And, again, I don't know if, Jordan's a tremendous athlete. Everybody knows that, but I don't know if he would have the timeline, that it would take to take that. He's going to go for one more Olympics, I believe he said, in 2021. He's going to make one more run. It's like, let's say he wins gold and then decides I'm going to transition MMA, and then, he just has to spend a year or two maybe trying to make that jump. And I just don't know if now you're going in there when you're 34, 35, and I don't know if that would, be realistic. Even guys like Ben Askren, who were high-level wrestlers, he never really developed his striking game. And then that obviously was really his downfall in the UFC. I mean, when he fought like George Masvidal, he's going in for a double, and Masvidal hits the knee. But so that, obviously was a problem. And then lastly, I want to just mention that, Burroughs himself in some of these interviews brings up the money topic. He says, I look at guys like Conor McGregor and I see him driving Lamborghinis and he has these mansions and Rolexes and all this stuff. And he goes, and I'm thinking maybe I could do that, or maybe I should have done that. And, when it comes to the money, again, going back to our original point, which was, a lot of wrestlers had to make the transition because they weren't making anything in the early years of wrestling, with the Schultz brothers and things like that. These wrestlers, high-level wrestlers, are now making money. Kyle Snyder himself, he's obviously an Olympic gold medalist. He was paid $250,000 for his Olympic gold medal, essentially, through charities and whatnot. And, online resources have him valued at $8 million. He's 25 years old. So, wrestlers are now making. Now, obviously, you might be saying, well, not everybody's an Olympic caliber wrestler. Not everybody gets that shot. Well, you're right. But some of these guys are, sponsorship worthy even without a gold medal. Guys like Kyle Dake. I think he's estimated online at $4 million. David Taylor has yet to win his Olympic gold. I think he will, but, he's still worth, I think it says $5 million. So my point is just that, are you making Conor McGregor money? Well, not necessarily. McGregor, I think they said he's made like $15 million in the UFC. Obviously the Mayweather fight was far more than that. I want to say closer to 100 million, but McGregor's he's an exception. He's not the rule. Most UFC fighters, I think it says on average, are making 120 some, 130 some $1,000 a year, which isn't bad. Right? But as a wrestler, high-level wrestler like Jordan Burroughs, he's a superstar. He's worth, approximately $5 million according to online resources. So he has a lot of sponsorships. I mean, look, he's, like I said, not only did he get his money for his Olympic gold, but he also has these sponsorships, and these sponsorships can be very lucrative. I've even heard experts say that some athletes make more off of their endorsements than their actual playing careers. And I believe that. Again, I knew a guy, he was fighting in the UFC, and he wasn't even a big name. This guy was like a preliminary card fighter, and he was offered $30,000 just to, basically wear a particular brand, MMA brand, because obviously they're trying to attract customers. They're trying to market their brand, and this kid's given $30,000, and I was just really surprised because, like I said, he wasn't a big name. He was known through MMA circles, but he wasn't a headliner that you could just ask the average lay person, like, hey, have you ever heard of this guy? They're gonna say no. But he was, my point is just that there's sponsorship money out there. There's money out there. And so, Jordan would need to be careful making those decisions based on money, because you start chasing the money and you start making some bad decisions. The next thing you know, you're putting yourself in a position where maybe you shouldn't be. And, nobody wants to see Jordan Burroughs go in the UFC and get, well, God forbid, injured, but even knocked out or beat. He's a hero in the wrestling world. He's a hero, especially here in the United States, but I think probably, all over the world as far as wrestling is concerned. And he's held in high regard. And, and then if he tries to make this transition because he's looking for, a bigger payout, which he probably could get a nice contract just because, his reputation and his name, and, he's going to, bring people to the fight because all the fans would want to see it. But, I just don't think it's worth it. And like I said, the guy's worth $5 million. You're not Conor McGregor, but you're definitely doing okay, so, that's pretty much it. That's my 2 cents. I just think it's like I said, initially when somebody I heard that mentioned, and I've seen some interviews with him. He was on Joe Rogan podcast, and he's been, doing some media and stuff. And I think he's, getting geared up for his 2021 run. And it's, at first I thought it sounded like a good idea. Yeah, let's win 2021 and then let's go ahead and get in the UFC and, make our name there. But the more I started thinking about it, and like I said, I started looking more into the money side of things, and, I just don't think it would be a wise move for him. So, take it for what it is. That's my 2 cents. I'll see you down the road.